What's up everybody, it's Man of Lone World Fiber here. My name's Luke, and in this video we're going to be taking another look at the Skullmasher as a part of my Does It Suck series. The Skullmasher is the Legendary Jakobs Sniper rifle that is available as a drop most commonly from Son of Mothrakk in the main game. This weapon also received a DLC loot source, another giant rack called Rakkanoth in Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt. Being that this weapon only commonly drops from two giant rack that move around pretty high and pretty quickly in the sky, it can make this weapon more difficult to farm because when killing those two enemies, they sometimes throw their gear out of bounds. It's always really depressing to run all the way through Wildlife Exploitation Preserve to Son of Mothrakk and then see him throw your Skullmasher somewhere where you can't go get it. Regardless, like many other weapons, it did receive a buff as a part of the community patch, which is why we're going to be taking another look at it. We're going to start here by looking at the unpatched version of the weapon, and then move on to applying the patch to see how it has changed. Now, without the community patch, the Skullmasher definitely doesn't suck. It's a very potent weapon, and we're going to take a look at that here in the Washburn Refinery. This version of the Skullmasher has the Jakobs grip and the base damage accessory, giving it a Skookum prefix. If we compare the damage on this particular weapon to some other Jakobs snipers, we can see that the damage is significantly higher than the Muckamuck. But when you're looking at the Skullmasher's damage, you will see that it has a pellet count, much like a shotgun. Now, the damage on the Skullmasher when you have all 5 pellets hit is actually higher than that of the elephant gun, which is pretty wild because the elephant gun is another Jakobs sniper, and it's the Jakobs sniper that does the most damage on a single pellet. And so, because of that, the Skullmasher is going to be pretty damn buff, right? Not only does it have more damage than the Skullmasher, it has the same fire rate as a Muckamuck, but it does have a significantly lower accuracy than you see on most snipers. So let's take a look at that real quick and see how the spread is happening here on this weapon. If we shoot it, you can see that it has multiple bullet decals kind of all stacked up on one another there. And they're a little bit spread out, but if we compare that to like a Muckamuck spread, you can see that it's really not that much bigger. In a lot of cases, you'll still fit that all on one enemy's critical hit spot, which is pretty crazy, and that will give you a lot of effective damage. Now, part of the reason that spread is so small is because of Zero's skill tree and the points we currently have in precision. I threw 4 points into this skill, and then it's also being boosted by 5 by the Legendary Sniper class mod. And so that definitely helps it have all of those pellets very, very, very close to one another. And that's going to help it put out a lot more consistent damage. Let's take a look at how this weapon performs real quick, and then we'll move on to applying the community patch. Now, without the community patch, this is still a very potent weapon, so a lot of people are going to wonder why it got a boost. You can see here that it can easily kill an enemy without slag at overpower level 8, which is quite a feat, and, you know, not a lot of weapons have that kind of potential. So that is something that definitely works in the Skullmasher's favor. You can see that with slag, it takes enemies out even quicker, which is to be expected. But you can see here that, you know, we're going to work through most of these enemies very, very quickly here using the Skullmasher, which is awesome. The Skullmasher is definitely a potent weapon. Is it a top tier sniper? That's kind of hard to say. You know, it's definitely not as powerful as, say, the Pimpernel or the Pimpernel or the Lyuda are, but I do think it's more powerful than a Muckamuck. I would probably say that so long as you have points in precision, the Skullmasher is going to be the most powerful of the Jakobs snipers. And that is probably the case before and after the community patch, but I'm interested to see what kind of, you know, patches happened here in the community patch. Now, I didn't play Borderlands The Pre-Sequel too much, but as I understand it, the buff is directly out of Borderlands The Pre-Sequel, which is going to be pretty cool. It's a buff that, you know, I guess Gearbox decided to do between two of their actual games, so it should be interesting to see exactly how well this weapon is going to perform. You can see here that at this point, I'm just absolutely wrecking enemies. I have a modest amount of Critical Ascension, and we don't even really need slag for your standard enemies. Speaking of standard enemies, though, we are almost to a badass, and so I'm interested to see, you know, how we do against this badass here. Make sure he gets nice and slagged. We'll throw multiple slag grenades just to kind of ensure that. Get him kunai'd. And it almost took them all out in one hit there. So that is a very, very powerful weapon. Almost, one-shot that guy with very little amount of critical ascension there. So that's a strong weapon, We didn't have too much trouble in there. So I can definitely see why some people would say this weapon doesn't need a buff, but they gave it the buff straight from Borderlands The Pre-Sequel. So I want to go to Sanctuary real quick and just look at the damage numbers on this weapon and kind of compare it before and after the patch. Now, obviously, with the patch, gemstone weapons get a lot better, so it'll be interesting to see if the buffed Skullmasher is still going to remain better than the citrine Muckamuck. Currently, when you compare the weapons, the Skullmasher has significantly more damage, and the Skullmasher gets another pellet with the community patch, as I understand it, because that's what happened in the pre-sequel. But also, gemstone weapons get a lot better as well, so we'll take a look at how that works out. Regardless, we'll go ahead and shoot this dummy one time. And you can see that we get like 12 million damage there, I think. Let's try that again. So 10 million damage that time, which is still pretty crazy. Let that stack fall off again. 10 million damage. That is quite a bit of damage. And if we do the Muckamuck, we can see that it's going to get less than that, at about 6.5 million damage. Switching on over to the Elephant Gun, we can see that the Elephant Gun is going to do a little over 9 million damage. So the Skullmasher is definitely the best Jakobs sniper rifle as I see it, so long as you have points in precision. If you don't have points in precision, the Muckamuck may be a little bit more consistent, but with 0 skill tree, this one definitely reigns supreme. So on the card right now, it has, we'll call it 414k damage times 5. It has an accuracy of almost 86, so 414,000 damage times 5. Let's quit out, apply the community patch, and see how that has changed. I'm excited to also apply the community patch because it also makes Critical Ascension easier to maintain, which will be another buff for the weapon, but indirectly. So let's see if it has the same damage here on the card. Still the 414, still the 85.5 accuracy, so it looks like the only change is that we got one more pellet here, which is still going to let it outpace even the buffed Muckamuck, which is pretty cool. Now, the buffed Elephant Gun is actually going to slightly outpace it, so let's take a look at how that is here on the testing dummy. I think that that is a very good thing, right? I feel like the Elephant Gun should do more damage on a single trigger pull because its fire rate is so much more atrocious. But let's take a look at it. The fire rate's not atrocious at all on the Skullmasher. I don't mean to imply that it is. Let's go ahead, shoot this guy in the head here. So now it's at the 12 million damage. Again, 10.58 that time. Weird. Let's wait for the Critical Ascension to go away, perhaps. Perfect. So that one we actually missed some pellets on. Let's go ahead and try it one more time here. 12 million. So that's pretty cool. Significant buff and damage for the weapon there. Let's take a look at how the Muckamuck is doing now. The Muckamuck's going to be at about 7.3 million, which is still more damage than it was doing beforehand. So that's pretty cool. Again, 7.3 million. Now we'll switch on over to the Elephant Gun and see if it's actually doing more than 12 million here. Yeah, it's actually doing almost 18 million, I think. Is that right? Let's try that one more time. Wait for that stack of Critical Ascension to go away. Yeah, almost 18 million damage. And so I do think that that is a nifty distinction between the Elephant Gun and the Skullmasher. Without the community patch, the Elephant Gun is completely obsoleted by the Skullmasher. With the community patch, the Elephant Gun does actually meet its own niche of having the most damage on a single shot. And so that's pretty cool there. Let's head to the Washburn Refinery and see if the more potent Skullmasher is going to be even better. There are a couple other changes, obviously. So we'll see how it performs. Now, I do think it's going to be very, very beneficial for the weapon in order to... Why is it only boosting 4 skills? Oh, the 5th skill is Fast Hands. It's going to be very, very beneficial for the weapon to operate with the improved Critical Ascension I really like the improved Critical Ascension. I think that it makes Critical Ascension a lot easier to maintain in co-op scenarios where the skill really does not shine. And so when you have a little bit more forgiving Critical Ascension, it makes co-op a lot more fun with Sniper Zero. Regardless, let's get started here. So we'll just blow off a couple of this guy's limbs. Perfect. So we could actually kill a large number of these guys without slag, just to kind of build up Critical Ascension on purpose, but I don't think we really need to do that. There is a guy back there who has an incredible weapon, so we'll try to knock off or disable that arm if we can. I don't think we can. Not with that guy in our face, at least. So, didn't see that bull loader coming. We'll go ahead and adjust for him. Perfect. Alright, so we lost a little bit of Critical Ascension because we had to retreat and we missed some shots and stuff. But it's not a huge deal. Awesome. So, we're continuing to blow these guys apart. You can see that this is a very strong weapon. There is no doubt about that. Cool. Knock his arm off there. Is that really all of them? Huh. No, I was going to say there are usually more enemies than that in the first room. I don't know what's going on. So, we'll kill this guy without slag just because he didn't really pose a threat to us. Same with this guy, I guess. Perfect. There is a feller around the corner here. We almost one-shot him before the patch with a lesser amount of Critical Ascension. So I'd imagine that this time we will finish him off. Yep. This is an awesome weapon. Did it need a buff? Maybe not. Am I happy it got a buff? I am, actually. Because, you know, Jakobs is kind of the company that most people are going to recall first when you ask about a sniper in Borderlands 2. I mean, their whole company motto is if it took more than one shot, you weren't using a Jakobs. So what I'm kind of noticing here is that at extreme ranges, the spread is actually happening to the point where a Muck may have been doing more damage because all of that damage would be on a single pellet instead of pellets that have time to spread out a little bit further. We'll just continue to build up Critical Ascension here, and I would imagine that we're going to start taking these enemies out even quicker. Cool. Now, the Muck does, or excuse me, the Skullmasher, but also the Muck do have a decent amount of recoil, and so that'll be something to watch out for when using the weapon. It does have a very high base fire rate for a sniper, but the recoil makes it such that you can't use that full fire rate all the time. So that's something to watch out for, I guess. Another hot loader over here. Getting a lot of hot loaders, it looks like. You can see, though, that even at a good amount of Critical Ascension, we weren't one-hitting that hot loader. And why was that? Because we weren't close enough to him for all of those pellets to hit, I think. So perhaps velocity would have been a good investment with this weapon as well, because the pellets would not have as long to spread out. So my mistake there for not speccing into velocity. This weapon could be even more potent if we had specced into velocity. Alright. Even without those points in velocity, though, this weapon is totally wrecking. I will have to remember that when using the Skullmasher in the future. I kind of want to farm for one now that Rakkanoth respawns, because he is a much shorter walk than Son of Mothrakk. Now, in the unpatched version of the game, Rakkanoth does not respawn, and so that's another thing that just made the Skullmasher a little bit harder to farm than a lot of other weapons. Now, if they are going to make any additional amendments to the community patch, one thing I would really like them to do is to make it so that you can shoot through the antagonist. I had a couple shots ago shot my antagonist ball, and that is always a unsavory feeling there. Alright, a few more enemies for us to take out in this room. Jeez, this weapon's brutal for some of these enemies, and I like that. You know, it's the Jakobs. It's the Jakobs sniper rifle, and the legendary one. Like I said, most people are probably going to recall Jakobs, their company motto. If it took more than one shot, you weren't using a Jakobs. And so I do get it, right? The Jakobs sniper was underwhelming in comparison to a lot of other snipers, especially some one-shot, one-kill Maliwan snipers. And so the fact that they've made it better now, made it how it was in the pre-sequel, I think that's pretty cool. I can't complain about that at all, you know? It's just another sniper that is more fun to use than it was beforehand. And, you know, I like sniper rifles, so I think it's pretty awesome. Now, I really like the way that Critical Ascension is coming with us here as well. That's one of those situations there where we must have missed at least a couple of those pellets on that critical hit there. So that is something to keep in mind. I would definitely recommend speccing into velocity if you're going to use the Skullmasher as your primary weapon. But keep in mind that when you do that, you are effectively getting the Pimpernel and the Lyuda a slight, decrease in power. Now, it can actually be a huge decrease in power if, for example, you max out precision or something like that. That's going to be really bad for the Pimpernel especially. The Lyuda would still be an especially powerful Vlad-off sniper, but you wouldn't get the multi-pellet abuse that you could otherwise get. I'm going to make sure and slag Hurley here with a slag Pimpernel because I do not have any more slag grenades on me, and then we're going to see how much of his health is going to be taken out by one rather boosted shot here from the Skullmasher. We have quite a bit of Critical Ascension, I would imagine, and this should allow us to fairly easily get a good damage on him. What I didn't mean to do there was what I did, which was waste my deception, so we'll wait till we get deception back here. Perfect. Alright. Take out his other arm if we can, and that actually took him all the way down. So there goes Hurley, that's good stuff. Might as well grab a couple grenades and whatnot because we were out. Cool. So did he drop a... Nope, he didn't drop a Sandhawk. I don't know if he can only drop Captain Blade items or if he can drop all pirate items. I think it's just Captain Blade items. I could be wrong. Regardless, still have a fancy amount of Critical Ascension here. I'd imagine that won't bode well for that guy. It didn't. This guy's a little bit further away, perhaps illustrating the benefits of precision. But also illustrating that we maybe don't need, at even a relatively long distance, that we don't need velocity too badly. So, that's pretty cool. Like I said, if we had velocity, it would only help this weapon, because the bullets would be moving so much faster. You can see that even if I had just thrown a single point in it, we would have got significantly more bullet speed, which would have given the pellets less time to spread out, and so the Skullmasher could have been even more potent. And we also would have got the, passive boost to gun and critical hit damage there as well. So that would have been a huge boost to the weapon, and even without that boost, this weapon still was extremely powerful. Like, it had no problems here in the Washburn Refinery at all. So did the Skullmasher really need a buff? Perhaps not, because it was still a very viable and high-tier weapon even before it had its additional 6th pellet. But with the buff, I like it even more. The Skullmasher was still less powerful than a lot of the highest tier Vlad-off and Maliwan snipers. And like I said, Jakobs is kind of the most traditional sniper company that a lot of people would immediately recall when they're imagining, Borderlands snipers or snipers within the Borderlands universe. So I do think it's pretty cool that it got a little bit more oomph because it puts it more on par with high-tier Maliwan and Vlad-off snipers, which I think is awesome. The Skullmasher is a very, very good weapon. It definitely doesn't suck. Even without the community patch, it definitely didn't suck. But with the community patch, it's even more potent, and I do think that's healthy. I think that it is a little bit more distinct now than the Muckamuck, and I like that it does less damage than the buffed elephant gun on a single shot. I think that's about where the damage should be lying. So really good job to Shadow Evil and the rest of the people who worked on the community patch with this little adjustment here. I guess they just kind of copied it from Gearbox, but the way that it works out in comparison to the elephant gun, for example, is really, really nice. So overall, making the Skullmasher as strong as it is in Borderlands The Pre-Sequel, I think is a very, very nice change to Borderlands 2, and something that has me kind of excited to farm for a Skullmasher out in Sir Hammerlock's big game hunt. Now that can be a difficult farm, but farming for Jakobs weapons is perhaps a little bit easier than farming for other weapons, because they don't have a variant in element, so in that regard it may be somewhat easier to farm. We'll try to remain optimistic and get lucky on that one. So, as always guys, I thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you haven't yet taken the time to subscribe, please do so. I'd appreciate that as well. Otherwise, I do hope to catch you next time. Bye guys.